Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the final edition of my top starts and sits for the it's 2024, but technically 2023 season. As always, guys, you're getting my top two starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. And as I've been hammering home, I feel bad for anybody that has their championship game this week because of how many starters are not going to be playing this week. I'm going to talk about that really quick before I get in the video. But this video is not only for people that just randomly have a championship game. Again, talk to your commissioner about that this week. But as I've said throughout the season in my start sits, these are also players you can factor into your daily lineups, or if you do pick'ems on Underdog like I do, I always factor these names in when I do my pick'em sets on the weekend on Underdog. With that being said, really quick, so teams that are locked into their playoff seeds, and now some information has came out today as far as who's playing, who's not playing starters. The 49ers, Ravens, and Chiefs and Browns, they are all locked into their playoff seeds. So it did come out today. Brock Purdy is not playing for the Niners this weekend. It came out on Monday that they weren't going to play Christian McCaffrey. So I will say this: that is the backfield for San Francisco. I will be talking about in this video. But all the other teams that aren't playing their starters, I'm not going to be talking about them because we don't know how that situation is going to unfold. So yeah, Ravens already announced Lamar is not playing along with other starters. Chiefs have announced that Patrick Mahomes along with other starters are not going to be playing. And then the Browns are even going to sit Joe Flacco this weekend. They're actually going to be playing Jeff Driscoll. So if you guys watched my streamable defense video, I even like the Bengals even more now as a streaming option. And then with the Lions, Dan Campbell, like I mentioned in my streaming defense video yesterday, he mentioned the other day that the starters will be playing. But the thing is with the Lions, they are pretty much locked into the third seed. The only way they can get to the second seed is if the Cowboys were to lose to the Commanders and the Eagles were to lose to the Giants. So very highly unlikely. Now the thing is, those two games are playing in the late afternoon slot. The Lions are playing in the initial afternoon slot. So maybe the Lions do play their starters all four quarters. But honestly, I kind of see the Lions maybe playing their starters for 2 or 3 quarters, and then they'll pull them, maybe just depending on how the game flow is going. And then something that's interesting too, though, is the Rams could be the 6th or 7th seed, but it appears they don't really care what seed they are. It came out today that Matthew Stafford isn't going to be playing. So Carson Wentz is actually going to be the starting quarterback for LA. And they're also benching other starters like Kieran Williams. So I'm not going to be speaking about the Rams players in this video as well. If you guys do choose to play any of these backups, that's at your own risk. I tend to trust guys that we've at least seen throughout the season, but I can maybe get why you'd maybe play Sam Darnold with a Kyle Shanahan at head coach. With that being said, let's just go ahead, dive right into this video. I'm gonna go through this really quick for you guys. My top starts at the quarterback position. I'm gonna go with Geno Smith against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are giving up the 5th most points per game this season. Now, for Geno Smith, the last 2 times he's played the Arizona Cardinals, he's thrown over 215 yards and threw for 2 touchdowns in each of those games. Now, the Cardinals have not been giving up a lot of passing yards over their last 4 games. They've only given up one quarterback that threw for over 240 yards in the last 4 weeks, but in that time frame, they've given up 9 passing touchdowns with just 2 interceptions, so just over 2 touchdowns a game. So I like a nice high floor for Geno, and I can see him potentially have a ceiling performance because the Seattle Seahawks do need to win this game to have a chance to get into the playoffs. My other start, I'm going to go with Gardner Minshew against the Texans. The Texans are giving up the 9th most points per game to quarterbacks this year. Now, the last time the Texans and the Colts played, Anthony Richardson actually started that game. He did get hurt, and Minshew came in. He led them to 2 touchdown drives, but the thing is with that, they were up 2 scores basically the whole game, so they mainly leaned into the leaned into the running a game. But Gardner Minshew, even in his limited action, replacing Richardson like about halfway through the second quarter, he threw for 171 yards and had a touchdown. Now, looking at this Texans defense, over their last 4 weeks, they have allowed 3 different quarterbacks to finish over 225 passing yards. Now, they've only given up 5 passing touchdowns in the last 4 weeks, but I also factor in they played the Titans twice, and they didn't allow the Titans to throw a passing touchdown. So I do think that number is a little skewed. So I still do like Gardner Minshew. And then another thing too is their defensive front right now. Like I think all 4 starters have not practiced so far in the first 2 days of practice. So if those guys are unable to play, or maybe they're at 75+% of their health and they do play, I do like the ability that the Colts might be able to should be able to protect Minshew, where he can carve up that secondary. My sits of the week, I am going to go with Baker Mayfield against the Panthers. The Panthers giving up the second fewest points per game to the quarterback position. If you guys have been following me all year round, all season long, you guys know I'm not saying sit him against the Panthers because the Panthers have a great defense. It's because a lot of teams are able to run against that Panthers defense. They're not forced to pass. And then most teams usually are up 2 or 3 scores by the third quarter, so they don't have to throw the ball. So that's why quarterbacks haven't scored a lot of points against the Panthers this year. Now, the last time the Bucks and the Panthers played, Baker just finished with 202 passing yards and a touchdown and an interception. So a very low floor game. And then when you look at the last 4 weeks for the Panthers defense, only one quarterback threw for over 200 passing yards against them. That was Jordan Love. Now, they have given up 5 passing touchdowns with 2 interceptions. So I do feel like if you play Baker, I'm not sure if he's going to get you a lot of yards. So you got to hope he at least throws you 2 or 3 touchdowns before they really lean into the run, assuming that they're up big on Carolina. My other sit, I'm going to go with Tua Tagovailoa against the Bills. The Bills are giving up the 6th fewest points per game against the quarterback position. Now, the last time these two teams played earlier this season, Tua did throw for 282 yards, but he only had 1 touchdown and 1 interception. So there is some proven success through the air, but again, he didn't really get a lot of touchdowns in that first game. And then you look at the last 4 games for the Bills defense, only one quarterback finished over 220 passing yards, and that was Patrick Mahomes. And one of those quarterbacks that didn't even reach that mark was Dak Prescott, who is in MVP conversation. And this is the thing that definitely kind of shies me away from playing Tua, especially in my daily lineups this week. The Bills have only allowed 1 passing touchdown, and they've picked off the quarterback 5 times in their last 4 games. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits at quarterback. Moving right now into the running back section, my top start, I am going to go with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet against the Cardinals. I love Walker this week. I like Charbonnet as a potential cheap play in your daily lineups. And the Cardinals are giving up the most points per game to the running back position. And then you look at the Walker's career against Arizona. He has 3 career games against them, and he has a finish with at least 97 rushing yards in 3 career games with them. And in his first 2 times he's played him, he had 3 touchdowns. Didn't score a touchdown in that first game of the season this year, but I like the chances he'll find the end zone this time around. And then looking at their last 4 games, 2 different running backs have finished over 100 rushing yards against the Arizona defense, and they've given up 4 running back touchdowns, so at least a touchdown a game. So I do like Walker with a high floor, and if you want to maybe go with a cheaper play in your daily lineups, take a chance on Zach Charbonnet popping off in this game. I wouldn't mind that as well. My other top start, I'm going to go with Tony Pollard against the Commanders. The Commanders are giving up the most points per game to the running back position. The 4th most points per game to the running back position. In the first game that they played, Tony Pollard finished with 103 total yards. 79 of those yards were rushing. He did have a touchdown in that game. And then over the last 4 weeks for the Commanders defense, 3 different running backs finished with at least 80 rushing yards, and they've allowed 7 running back touchdowns over the last 4 games. So almost given up 2 running back touchdowns a game over the last 4 weeks. And then this is just also a game where I could see the Dallas Cowboys up big time on the Commanders, where they're going to have to lean into the run. And then they just put their Deuce Vaughn on the IR this week. I'm not sure if Rico Dowdle is going to play, so I think Pollard's going to get a lot of touches in this game. So I could see him having a ceiling performance this week. Moving into my sits, I'm going to go with Ty Chandler against the Lions. The Lions are giving up the fewest points per game to running backs this year. When the Vikings and Lions played just a couple weeks ago on Christmas Eve, he only had 17 rushes and he had that touchdown. Now, that touchdown he scored, that's the only running back touchdown that the Lions have given up over the last 4 weeks. And then over that period, only one running back reached 50 rushing yards. He actually was right at 50 rushing yards, and that was D'Onta Foreman. So I just see a very low floor game where if Chandler, just like that last game, doesn't get you a touchdown, I don't see he's going to get you a lot of yards. But even then, he only had 17 yards and a touchdown. It's not a lot of fantasy points, right? So I would definitely be shying away from Chandler this week. Guys, I already talked. I hinted at this earlier. I was going to talk about the 49er backfield because I could see why I'd be tempted to play a 49er running back just because we've seen what CMC has done. But I would kind of stay away from that situation. I wouldn't play Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason against the Rams. The Rams have given up the second fewest points per game to running backs this year. Over the last 4 games for the Los Angeles defense, only one running back finished over 50 rushing yards, and that was Keaton Mitchell. And then they have not allowed a running back touchdown in the last 4 weeks as well. And then one other thing I just don't want to touch this situation is I just don't know how they're going to split the backfield. Don't forget, before they got Christian McCaffrey, how annoying was it to have San Francisco running backs, right? You never knew which running back to play because 1 week it was this guy, 1 week was the next guy. Last week, when CMC got hurt, Elijah Mitchell did dominate the touches, so maybe he's the safest play. But with the way that Shanahan's worked in the past, that's what would happen, right? And then also Jordan Mason would dominate the touches in this game. Or I could see them splitting it 50-50. Or it is Elijah Mitchell. I just don't want to take the chance on guessing the wrong guy. But on top of that, like I said, they both draw a very tough matchup against that Rams defense. So yeah, moving into my top starts and sits at wide receiver. I am going to go. I've stayed away from this Giants wide receiver room, suggesting them or even suggesting to sit them throughout the year because you just never knew. But we kind of have a clear top 2 guys, I believe, that you can trust in a matchup that is great on paper for them. I do like Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson against the Eagles. Eagles are giving up the most points per game to wide receivers this year. Now, when these two teams played on that Christmas game, Darius Slayton had 3 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown. And then you look at the last 4 games, 3 different wide receivers finished over 75 receiving yards against that defense. And they also have given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. So that's a touchdown, a little over a touchdown a game to that position. And then I know the Eagles have been a mess over the last 4 or 5 weeks, but they have a chance to potentially win the NFC East if the Cowboys were to lose to the Commanders. So I do kind of think they're going to put the pedal to the metal in this game, and if they are able to go up 2+ scores, that's going to lead to a lot of opportunities for Slayton and Robinson to see some targets in the passing attack. My other start, I am going to go with, even though I could see them going up big and leaning into the run like I mentioned with Pollard, I still do like Brandon Cooks against the Commanders. Commanders have given up the second most points per game to the wide receiver position this year. In the first game this year, Brandon Cooks actually had 4 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown in that game. And then over the last 4 weeks, the Washington defense has allowed 3 different wide receivers to finish over 100 receiving yards. And they have actually given up 6 wide receiver touchdowns over the last 4 games. So over a touchdown a game to the position. And he had success against them last time. I know and the Cowboys, like I've mentioned, they win this game. They win the NFC East. They get the 2nd seed. So I totally expect them to put the pedal to the metal, similar to the Eagles, and want to put up points early so they can rest their starters for the playoff matchup. My my top sit, staying in that same game, I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin against the Cowboys. Cowboys have only given up the 6th fewest points per game to wide receivers this year. And then when you look at Terry McLaurin's career against the Cowboys, he only averages 52.9 receiving yards against Dallas. And then he only has 3 touchdowns in 8 games against the Cowboys. Now, when they played earlier this season, he finished with 4 receptions for 50 yards. Now, I will say this, when I did research the last 4 games for the Cowboys defense, star wide receivers have had some really good outcomes. But the reason why I do still stay away from McLaurin is because he does have a history of not really blowing up against Dallas. And then we do currently have some uncertainty if it's going to be Sam Howell, is it going to be Jacoby Brissett? We don't know who's going to be at the quarterback position, but even if it's going to be Howell, he has not been able to consistently help Terry McLaurin produce throughout the season. So that's why I would definitely shy away from him this week. My other top sit, I'm going to go with Romeo Doubs against the Bears. Bears have given up the 11th fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. Now, in the first game, he had 2 touchdowns, right? That should be like, oh, Cody, he had 2 touchdowns. Why would I not play him? Now, keep in mind, that was a season opener, but I always think touchdowns can inflate and be fool's gold if you try to chase what a player did the last time he played him, because he only had 4 receptions for 26 yards. And then they just have a variety. And the other thing too is the Packers just have so many wide receivers. I feel like outside of Jaden Reed, you can't really trust either of them. Now Jaden Reed's going to be out of this, but it sounds like maybe Christian Watson's back in the lineup. Do they get Dontavian Wicks back in the lineup? Bo Melton kind of shined this past weekend. So I just think the targets are just going to be oddly separated, and I don't know if you can trust Doubs in your lineup. And then you look at the last 4 weeks for the Chicago defense, only 1 wide receiver finished over 60 receiving yards against them, and that was Amari Cooper, and they've only given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. Moving into my final segment, the lovely tight end position. I got my top start of the week. It is a big stream. Well, actually, he's really came along. You might have finished the season with him because he started seeing consistent targets. I know he was my tight end waiver wire target a couple weeks ago. But I do like Chigo Okonkwo against the Jaguars. Jaguars have given up the 7th most points per game to tight ends this year. Now, I will warn you guys, the first time they did play them, Chigo only had 1 reception for 6 yards. But I'm betting on that they have really struggled with the position as of late. 2 different tight ends have finished over 70 receiving yards against them, and then they also given up 3 tight end touchdowns, almost a tight end touchdown a game, which is actually pretty good when you've been doing this, when you've been looking at this throughout the season. So yeah, if you're looking for maybe a cheap option on your daily lineup, I would definitely consider Chigo. Another name I would go after is Dalton Kincaid against the Dolphins. Dolphins have allowed the 11th most points per game. And then just because they've been given a lot of yards and also touchdowns to the position over their last 4 games. Over the last 4 weeks, Miami has allowed 3 different tight ends to finish with at least 40 receiving yards against them, and they've given up 3 tight end touchdowns as well. So I like Dalton Kincaid kind of blowing up in that Sunday night matchup for the AFC East title on this week. My other tops, then moving into my top sits, these are names that you've kind of been, somewhat trustworthy throughout the year, but this is a week I would consider avoiding both these guys. Starting with my top sit, Evan Ingram against the Titans. Titans are giving up the fewest points per game to the tight end position in fantasy football. Now, for Ingram, in his last 2 games against the Titans, he finished below 30 receiving yards. When the Jaguars and Titans played earlier this season, he had 6 receptions, which would be great for like PPR leagues, but he only finished with 29 yards. Now, over the last 4 weeks, only 1 tight end finished over 50 receiving yards against them. That was Dalton Schultz. And now they have allowed 2 tight end touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. So I do feel like Evan Ingram, if he can at least get you a touchdown, that's all you could ask for in this matchup. But another thing that concerns me with playing Evan Ingram, there is some uncertainty with if Trevor Lawrence is going to play. He did practice in a limited fashion. I know Doug Peterson said he is hopeful T-Law can play this week, but as of right now, we can't bet on that happening, which makes me want to stay away from him. Plus, with Ingram just struggle with his past 2 games against the Titans, struggling to get the yardage, and then unless he gets you a touchdown or 2, I see a very low floor out of him. My other top sit, I'm going to go with Jake Ferguson against the Commanders. And it's kind of weird because I told you to play, Brandon Cooks, told you to play Tony Pollard, right? Why would I not play anybody against the Commanders? But it's just because tight ends have not been, I wouldn't say finding a lot of success. It's just because the wide receivers are basically so wide open, and then the running backs are just running the ball all over them. Teams just don't have to use their tight ends, right? So looking at the matchup, right, the tight ends have scored the 6th fewest points per game in fantasy against Washington this season. Now, when these 2 teams played earlier, Ferguson only had 1 catch for 35 yards. And then you look at the last 4 games for Washington, no tight ends finished over 40 receiving yards against them, and they have not allowed a tight end touchdown over their last 4 games. Again, this is not because they have a great defense. This is not because they scheme up some crazy way just to stop the tight end position. It's just because their secondary, their cornerbacks are so bad. They can't stop the run. So teams are just running, right? And then maybe they'll go to a play action, or they just attack them deep. And it's the wide receivers just running crazy all over them. They don't have to go to their tight ends unless they need to. So that's why I would stay away from Jake Ferguson. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for Week 18, the final one of the season. Still can't believe how crazy fast the season went along. I do appreciate anybody that's watched any of my videos, whether it's this was your only video you watched this year, or if you stuck with me through all 18 weeks. I definitely plan on doing these videos next season, so make sure you do follow me, you like all my videos, you subscribe to me on all the social media platforms. As far as like the type of videos you will get from me, you're not going to get fantasy videos. I kind of cut fantasy videos off in the off season until about July. I do focus on like the draft. I do, if you guys don't know, I write for Colts Wire, so I do a lot of stuff for Colts Wire in the lead up to the draft and covering the off season. But this off season, I do want to do a better job of producing video content for my YouTube and my TikTok followers. So I am going to come up with some ideas. I'm going to do my best to have at least a video a week, ideally, at least throughout the off season. Maybe when I get into the dead period of the calendar, there it might be more sporadic. But I definitely will keep you guys posted, but that's why you got to subscribe to me so you do get the latest content as soon as it's posted. I'm gonna hop off here. I wish you guys the best of luck. As always though, if you guys have any questions, hit me up. Peace out.